In this section, I just want to briefly summarize the options to $.ajax. I'm not going to go through these options in detail. Now, some of the options we have looked at already in detail, but the additional options I'm not going to go through in detail. I just want you to be aware that they exist. So sometime in the future, when you're a more advanced jQuery developer, and you say, oh, I wonder if it's possible to do blank, you can remember, oh, I think there was an option mentioned. Then you can go back and look it up. Then you can go to the jQuery documentation and get more detail. So this is not something you should apply now. You should just be aware that these capabilities exist. So as we saw, when you call $.ajax, you always supply, or almost always supply, URL and success. Now, strictly speaking, you could imagine leaving off success. Fire some information to the server and let the server do whatever it wants with it, and you don't have to do anything with the result that comes back from the server. But usually you want to at least verify that the server got it properly. So almost always you use URL and success. Obviously you need URL, but almost always, 99.5% of the time, you also use the success option. And so the options that are pretty common are URL, the relative address on the server, success, or sometimes complete, the handler function. We saw the data option for sending information to the server. You might want to do something when it fails. Alert the user, hey, the server is down, I couldn't send your information. We saw earlier the cache option, which is only used if you want to prevent the browser from caching. And that would only happen if the same input data can result in different results from the server. Data type you use for data-centric Ajax. And username and password would be used if the server-side resource requires authentication. Okay, those are the common ones, but let me summarize other ones as well. There's async, which normally is true, but occasionally you want to queue up the requests, and send them one at a time. You can do some side effects to the request object before the results go out. You can tell the browser that it shouldn't cache. You can have a handler that fires whether or not it was successful. We actually did that with our temporary messages. You can tell the server the data that I'm sending you is in a certain format. You rarely need this. Usually the server knows what format it is, and you don't have to specify the MIME type. The data option is certainly very common. Send the parameters to the server. We had several examples where we did this. There is a filtering option so that you can take the information that comes back and kind of throw away certain parts of it or clean it up in case it might be dangerous. Data type we just looked at that says, hey, what's coming back from the server is in such and such a format. Parse it for me automatically and pass me the parsed result, not the initial string. The error handler certainly could be valuable. Global has to do with jQuery has this idea that you can set some options. And then all jQuery Ajax calls in the future will automatically use those global options. But occasionally you want an exception, but you don't want to rewrite all the global options. So then you can say global false. Normally it's true. This if modified is pretty rare, but it says, should it be considered a success only if it's a new piece of content from the server, not if it's a previous piece of content we saw earlier. JSON-P is a little bit complicated. That has to do with sending back a function rather than an object from the server. It's not done so often anymore. Username and password is certainly useful for server-side resources that need authentication. The process data and car set options are pretty obscure. They're not used very often. Success we use all the time. Timeout. Now this is a good one. Success is triggered when there's no HTTP error code from the server and the response comes back in a certain amount of time. But what is that amount of time? You can change it using timeout. Traditional has to do with handling arrays that come back from the server. Type. Now here's a useful one that we'll visit very shortly. You can specify whether the HTTP request to the server is using GET or using POST. URL we use all the time. And you've probably heard other JavaScript programmers talk about the XML HTTP request object. You can supply a function for kind of making your own. This is extremely advanced and not done very often, but you should be aware at least that it exists. So I flew through this very quickly. I don't expect you to be able to use these options right now. Just remember that they exist. And then sometime in the future, when you have a lot of experience under your belt and you're trying very advanced things, you might remember, oh yeah, I heard a mention of this somewhere. Flip back to these slides, look up the details on the API, and be able to apply them.